The forest said my name before anything else did. And the voice sounded like someone who died years ago. I know how insane that sounds, and trust me, I wanted to believe it was just my imagination. But when you're standing alone in a place where the trees grow too close, the shadows stretch too long, and the air feels like it's holding its breath, you start to understand that some things out there don't care about what should or shouldn't be possible. I wasn't supposed to hear anyone. There wasn't a single human within miles of me. The nearest road was an hour behind me, and I'd followed an unmarked trail so deep into the forest that even the park maps didn't bother naming it. It was one of those forgotten places, where the trees are older than every town for 50 miles, and even hunters refuse to go after dark. I came here for a routine check. Nothing dangerous. Nothing supernatural. Just a simple, boring hike to mark my coordinates and make sure the boundary line was still secure. That's it. But the moment I stepped off the established trail, something felt wrong subtly at first. The temperature dropped, just enough to raise the short hairs on my arms. The wind died. Birds stopped singing. Even the insects went quiet, like something had pressed mute on the entire forest. And then it whispered my name. Soft. Slow. Familiar. Not just familiar, specific. A voice I recognized instantly, even though it couldn't be real, because the person it belonged to had been dead for over 5 years. My chest tightened so fast it felt like my ribs were collapsing inward. I froze, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every part of my brain screamed to move, but my body was locked in place, paralyzed by a fear I hadn't felt since childhood. The whisper came again. Closer. Like lips brushing the back of my ear. Sam! I whipped around so fast I nearly tore a muscle. But there was nothing behind me, just endless rows of tall, dark pines stretching into silence. No movement. No footsteps. Not even the usual rustling of leaves. But the forest had changed. I didn't notice it until the quiet became suffocating. The air felt thicker, heavier, like it didn't want me breathing it. The trees seemed to lean in, their trunks bent toward me in unnatural angles, as if listening. I swallowed hard, telling myself it was a trick of my mind. Stress. Fatigue. The kind of auditory hallucination people get when they're alone too long. But then my phone buzzed. A notification. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. One new voicemail. From my own number. The screen flickered for a moment, just long enough to make my stomach twist, before the audio started playing automatically. First it was just static. Soft, distant static like wind blowing through an old radio. Then came breathing. Slow. Uneven. Wet. It wasn't my breathing. And beneath that, something scraping. Dragging. A sound like fingernails or teeth scraping across wood. Then the voice. The same familiar voice from behind me. Except this time it spoke clearly. Calmly. Coldly. Don't run yet. My heart stopped. The voicemail ended abruptly, leaving only the sound of my own panicked breath echoing through the trees. I didn't hit replay. I didn't have to, because a few seconds later, so quiet I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. The whisper drifted through the trees again. Right behind me. I'm already here. At that moment I knew something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong, and that the forest wasn't empty anymore. Before any of this happened, before the forest whispered my name, before I realized something was terribly wrong, I was just doing my job. Nothing heroic. Nothing dangerous. Just another routine day in a long line of predictable shifts. My name is Samuel Hayes, and I work as a seasonal wildlife surveyor for the state. It's not as exciting as it sounds. Most days are spent cataloging tree health, checking trail markers, and making sure campers aren't wandering into restricted zones. I've hiked these woods for years. I know this forest better than I know my own neighborhood. Every trail, every ridge, every sinkhole. I've mapped it all multiple times. And honestly, I like the quiet. That morning started like every other peaceful field day. It was 7:40 a.m. when I pulled into the ranger station parking lot. The sun creeping over the treeline in a warm orange glow. The forest always looks harmless at that hour, soft, calm, almost welcoming. There was still dew on the grass, the kind that sparkles under early sunlight. A couple of birds were chirping somewhere off near the creek. It was one of those mornings where nothing feels heavy or complicated. Just fresh air, warm coffee, and the scent of pine drifting through open car windows. Inside the station, everything felt quiet and normal. My coworker Liam was already gone. He'd left earlier for a long-range check. He'd scribbled a note on the whiteboard telling me which sector he was covering and reminding me to grab extra batteries, because your old ones suck. I smiled at that. Typical Liam. I packed my gear intentionally calmly. Compass, knife, spare socks, 2 granola bars, water flask, flare, GPS tracker, notebook. I wasn't rushing. My mind felt clear. Peaceful. I even hummed while tightening my boots. I remember thinking how good the day was going to be. No emergencies. No lost hikers. No sudden storms. Just quiet work. By 9 a.m., I was already deep into the main trail. The forest looked beautiful. Sunlight pushing through the leaves in bright streaks. Insects buzzing lazily. The distant sound of a woodpecker knocking against an oak trunk. There's a spot about a mile in where the trail dips slightly, crossing a shallow creek. I stopped there for a moment, letting the cool breeze drift over the water. I always pause at that creek. It feels like the forest's front porch, calm, safe, warm. My assignment was simple. Head out to the unmarked northern boundary. Check the old survey posts. Confirm if the line had shifted or if the storm last week knocked anything over. Easy stuff. Supposed to take 4 hours max. As I followed the trail, I even took pictures. Tiny mushrooms growing on a fallen log. A squirrel glaring at me from a branch. Sunlight bouncing off a spider web like silver thread. Stupid little things, but I like capturing them. They make the reports feel less dry. Around 10:15, I reached the fork that led toward the deeper, lesser-used part of the forest. The area most hikers avoid. Not because it's dangerous, just because it's boring. Flat terrain, thick pine growth, no scenic overlooks. But for me, it was just another quiet walk, another routine checkpoint. My thoughts were calm. Mostly about what I'd cook for dinner. How I needed to fix the loose door hinge at home. How peaceful everything felt. The forest wasn't quiet in a threatening way. It was the normal kind of quiet. Leaves rustling. Birds calling. Wind brushing past in soft waves. I remember actually thinking how lucky I was to have a job that let me escape the noise of real life. There was no fear. No tension. No warning. Just a typical day. A peaceful forest. Work I'd done 100 times before. If someone had told me that within a couple of hours, this same forest would try to swallow me whole, I would have laughed. Because that morning nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt dangerous. Everything felt safe. Too safe, maybe. The shift was small at first, so small I almost convinced myself it wasn't happening. I'd left the main trail and entered the deeper pines, just like my map directed. The forest looked the same as always. Long straight trunks, soft needles underfoot, patches of light breaking through the branches. Nothing unusual. Nothing strange. But as I walked farther in, the soundscape changed. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like the forest was slowly inhaling, holding its breath. The birdsong that had filled the air earlier grew scattered, then faint. The woodpeckers stopped. Even the insects seemed quieter. The wind that had been brushing through the treetops went still, leaving the air oddly heavy. I paused, listening. Nothing. Not silence exactly, just an absence of the things that should have been there. I told myself it was normal. Weather shifts happen. Animals move. Forests breathe like anything else. But my shoulders tightened anyway. Something in my gut whispered that the calm from earlier had thinned into something else. Something stretched. I kept walking. A few minutes later I started hearing it. A soft clicking sound coming from somewhere deep in the trees. Not fast. Not rhythmic. Just click, click, click in an uneven pattern. Could have been branches tapping. Could have been a deer. Could have been anything. But it didn't sound like any forest noise I recognized. Too sharp. Too deliberate. I slowed my steps, scanning between the trunks. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. But each time I took a few more steps, the clicking seemed to follow from behind the trees, always keeping its distance, never getting closer, never fading. I tried brushing it off, focusing instead on the job. I found the first survey post and logged its condition. Normal. I noted the GPS coordinates, took a picture, and moved on. But I couldn't shake that creeping sense of being watched. It didn't feel like a predator stalking. Predators stay quiet. Predators blend. This felt like attention. Eyes. somewhere behind me, somewhere hidden. Every time I turned around, I saw nothing but rows of identical pines stretching into darkness. The air grew colder as I walked deeper. Not freezing, just wrong for the time of day. A creeping cool that wrapped around my neck and settled on my skin like mist. I exhaled and saw the faintest cloud of breath. That didn't make sense. It was early afternoon. It wasn't nearly cold enough for that. I rubbed my arms, forcing myself to keep moving. The job wasn't hard. I just needed to check 3 more posts and I'd be done. A couple more hours and I'd be driving home, laughing at myself for getting spooked over nothing. Then another sound drifted through the trees, this time a soft, slow dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the forest floor. I stopped dead. The dragging went silent immediately, like it had been waiting for me to notice. I listened for movement, branches cracking, leaves rustling, footsteps. Nothing. Just stillness. I moved again, slow steps, careful breathing. And behind me, faint but unmistakable, drag. I turned fast, scanning the forest. But again, nothing. No animal. No person. Not even a disturbed patch of pine needles. It wasn't dangerous yet. Not clearly. Not undeniably. But the forest felt different now. Like it was watching me move between its ribs. The light dimmed slightly, though no clouds covered the sun. Shadows thickened between the trees, stretching longer than they should have. The trees seemed tighter together. Closer. As if the deeper I walked, the more the forest wanted me to stay. I swallowed hard. Something was wrong. I could feel it like a weight on my chest, subtle, steady, impossible to ignore. But nothing had jumped out. Nothing had appeared. Nothing had happened. Not yet. And that was somehow worse. The forest didn't just feel wrong anymore. Something inside it had finally decided to step forward. It started with the wind stopping. Not slowing, stopping. 1 second the branches were swaying gently overhead. The next everything froze, held in place like someone had hit pause on the world. Even the leaves on the ground, scattered around my boots, sat perfectly still. My breathing suddenly felt too loud. Then I heard it. Not footsteps. Not breathing. Not an animal. A voice. It wasn't speaking words. It wasn't whispering. It was humming low, continuous, almost melodic. And it was coming from somewhere deeper in the trees. It sounded human. Except it didn't stop to breathe. A single uninterrupted note, vibrating through the trees like it was inside the trunks themselves. My chest tightened as if the sound were physically pressing against me. I turned slowly, expecting someone to step out from behind a tree. But no one was there. The humming grew louder, not closer, just louder, like the forest itself was making the noise. And then without warning, the temperature dropped. Not a normal cold. This felt sharp, biting, the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache. I exhaled, and my breath came out in a thick cloud even though it had been warm seconds earlier. Hello. I called out before my brain could stop me. The humming stopped instantly. I felt it before I saw anything, the pressure of a gaze. Heavy. Focused. Too focused. It felt like someone was inches from the back of my head, staring so hard they could see through my skull. My skin crawled like every hair on my body was trying to stand up and leave. I didn't turn around. Something inside me, some instinct older than thought, refused to let me turn. Then the trees behind me creaked. Not from the wind. From weight. Slow. Deliberate. Like something tall was leaning between them, shifting its mass. The humming started again. This time directly behind me. Not in the forest. Behind. My neck. I spun around. Nothing. But the trees weren't the same. They had shifted, closer together, almost bent inward, as if forming a shape, a silhouette. Tall. Thin. Wrong. Branches twisted into what looked like shoulders. A hollow where a face should have been. Blacker than the surrounding night. The figure didn't move. It didn't breathe. But the forest did. Every tree gave off a faint, trembling groan. Like they were being pulled toward that shape. I shouldn't be here, I whispered. But my voice shook so badly it barely sounded like me. The silhouette twitched. Just once. A small, unnatural jerk of its head. Like a puppet pulled by an invisible string. That movement was enough to break something inside me. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots that hadn't been there before. My flashlight flickered violently, dimming with each pulse, like the darkness around me was swallowing the light. Then the humming cut off again. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Predatory silence. The shape took a step forward. No footstep sound. No rustling leaves. It simply shifted closer, the space between us shrinking with impossible smoothness. That was the moment I finally knew. This wasn't a person. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't something that should exist in any forest. This was the thing the woods had been holding back. Something patient, something ancient, something that had finally decided I was close enough to reach. And it wasn't going to let me walk out. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran. The moment that thing shifted toward me, every survival instinct in my body exploded at once. I spun around so fast I nearly slipped, my boots skidding across the cold dirt as I sprinted blindly between the trees. Branches whipped against my face. My lungs burned instantly, but none of it mattered. Because behind me the forest moved. Not the wind. Not the leaves. The forest. Trees groaned and cracked as if something massive was weaving between them at impossible speed. I didn't dare look back. Not when every fiber of my being was screaming to just keep going, keep running, keep breathing. But I heard it. Not footsteps. The humming. It was following me. Growing louder. Sharper. More piercing. The sound vibrated through my ribs with every note, like it was tunneling into my bones. I stumbled forward, nearly falling, catching myself on a trunk, but the bark wasn't rough. It felt warm. Like skin. I jerked my hand back just as the tree shifted slightly toward me. No time to think. I pushed off and sprinted again, ducking under low branches, jumping over roots that seemed to rise out of the ground to grab my ankles. The flashlight flickered again. No, 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 don't do this. I hissed through clenched teeth as I slapped it with my palm. The beam sputtered back to life just in time to illuminate a fallen log. I vaulted over it and kept running, my heartbeat thundering in my ears louder than the humming, until the humming stopped. Everything stopped. My legs froze mid-stride. The silence hit me like a wall. My throat tightened. I didn't know if the thing had given up or... A branch snapped directly to my right. Then another. And another. The sound circled me. Fast. My breath hitched. It was playing with me. Hurting me. Forcing me somewhere. Think. I whispered. Just think. The only thing nearby was a small ravine, the kind that swallowed animals whole. A shallow stream cut through the bottom, barely reflecting light. I didn't have a plan. I just jumped. The fall knocked the air out of my chest, pain exploding along my side as I slammed into the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, bouncing off a rock and rolling into the stream. Darkness swallowed me completely. Above, the humming began again, this time soft, almost playful. I pressed myself against the ravine wall, biting back a gasp of pain as something tall moved along the ridge above me. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long, reaching down toward where I crouched. The humming lowered into a slow, deep vibration, too smooth, too controlled, as if it were scanning the ground. I held my breath. The shadow paused. Then it leaned. The silhouette extended downward as if the trees themselves bent with it, searching the ravine for me. I clamped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to scream. My heart hammered so violently I worried it would echo against the stone. Then my fingers brushed something cold in the dirt. The flashlight. Barely working. Half flooded. But still faintly glowing. I wrapped my hand around it and waited until the shadow moved slightly away. Then I bolted. I scrambled up the opposite side of the ravine, clawing at roots, dragging myself upward with raw desperation. Dirt filled my nails. My arms shook. The humming behind me rose in pitch. Angry now, aware I was moving. Halfway up, my foot slipped. The flashlight slipped too, falling, clattering against rock. The humming turned into a grinding screech. I lunged upward, grabbing onto a thick root and hauling myself over the edge just as something long and black shot up from the ravine, grasping, reaching, missing me by inches. I didn't stop running. The trees blurred around me. The ground shook behind me as the thing chased, its movements faster, more violent, tearing through the forest with enraged force. I spotted a distant glimmer through the trees, my campsite's lantern. Safety. Maybe. I sprinted toward it, every muscle screaming, vision blurring, lungs shredding themselves for oxygen. The humming was so loud now I couldn't even hear my own footsteps. The forest thinned. The lantern grew brighter. My tent came into view. Something grabbed the back of my jacket. A cold, razor-sharp grip. Not a hand. Not anything human. I screamed, ripping forward with all the strength I had left. The fabric tore, sending me stumbling into the clearing. I hit the ground hard, face first into the dirt, but I didn't stop. I crawled, dragging myself toward the lantern like it was the last light left in the world. The humming stopped right at the edge of the clearing. I looked up. The thing stood at the tree line. Tall, bent, limbs too long, head tilted at a sickening angle. It did not enter the clearing. It just watched, waiting, breathing, like it wanted me to know this wasn't over. Like it wanted me to understand it could reach me anytime it wanted. The lantern flickered, and the thing melted back into the trees. Gone. But the forest didn't feel empty. Not anymore. I stayed in that clearing for what felt like hours, though I know it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. My hands were still shaking. My throat felt raw. Every breath came out shallow and uneven, like my body couldn't decide whether it was safe yet. But nothing moved. The trees stood still. The night air hung silent. No humming. No screeching. Nothing. Just me and the lantern. I forced myself to sit up, my muscles trembling with leftover adrenaline. My jacket was torn clean down the back, like someone had sliced it open with a blade. I ran my fingers over the ripped fabric again and again, hoping there was some rational explanation. I couldn't find one. I told myself to pack up and leave. Just get out. Run now, think later. But when I stood, my legs nearly gave out. I grabbed the lantern and steadied myself. Its warm glow pushed back the darkness just enough for me to feel like I could breathe again. Almost. I scanned the forest edge in every direction, waiting for something to move. But the trees didn't shift. The shadows didn't crawl. The thing, whatever it was, didn't show itself again. I told myself, if it wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. It didn't feel like comfort. Felt like a warning. I turned back to my tent, but the sight stopped me cold. The zipper was open. Wide open. I had closed it before leaving earlier. I remembered the sound of it. The feel of it. I wasn't mistaken. My chest tightened. I raised the lantern and took one step closer. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. My sleeping bag was still neatly unrolled. My backpack was where I left it. There were no claw marks, no torn fabric, no footprints on the tent floor. Nothing to prove anything had ever been there. That should have calmed me. It didn't. Because the zipper wasn't damaged. It wasn't forced open. It wasn't torn. It was unzipped. By hand. Or by something that understood how. I swallowed hard and backed away from the tent entirely. No way I was stepping inside again. I grabbed my backpack, slung it over my shoulder, and started packing whatever I could with shaking fingers. I needed to leave. Now. But when I reached for the lantern to start walking, I noticed something in the dirt. A footprint. But not mine. It was long, narrow, and deep, far deeper than any human footstep should be. Only one print. Right at the edge of the clearing. Pointing directly toward me. Like it had stood there. Watching. Until the moment I looked up. My heartbeat spiked again. I spun my head toward the same spot, lantern raised, expecting to see those long limbs sliding between the trees. Nothing. Silence. But I couldn't unsee it. That footprint didn't match anything I could explain. Any animal, any person, nothing. I wanted to photograph it. Anything to prove I wasn't losing my mind, but my phone was dead. Completely dead. Though I had charged it before leaving the campsite. I stared at the dark forest for a long time, trying to understand what had happened, trying to make it logical, trying to convince myself I wasn't being hunted. Eventually I started walking, slow steps at first, then faster, gripping the lantern like it was my only lifeline. Every few feet I stopped, listening, waiting for the humming to return. It never did. But the forest still felt wrong, like the air held its breath as I passed, like the darkness shifted behind me each time I moved the lantern. When I reached the trailhead, my body finally relaxed just enough for me to exhale. I stepped out of the tree line, into the open dirt of the parking area, almost collapsing in relief when I saw my car waiting where I left it. Safe. Finally safe. Or so I thought. I opened the driver's side door and froze. Because on the dusty window, drawn with a single long stroke, was a line. One simple line. Straight down. Like someone or something dragged a finger across the glass. Fresh. Clear. Perfectly vertical. Not there before. I looked back toward the forest. The trees stood still. The night stayed silent. But something inside those woods was still watching me. Waiting. Like it knew this wasn't the end. Like it knew I would come back someday. And when I do, I don't think I'll walk out again.